Hello and welcome to In Conversation with Kashmir Times. I'm Anuradha Bhasin. On December the 22nd, 2023, three civilians, Shaukat, Safir and Shabir, were allegedly killed in custody at an army camp in Poonch, and several other men were tortured. The incident came to light when several videos shot inside the camp showing the horrifying scale or nature of torture was circulated on the social media within days of the incident. Now, a recent detailed report on the incident in the caravan titled Screams from the Army Post by Jitendra Kaur Tur provides insights into more chilling realities pertaining to the incident. The report quotes eyewitnesses and provides evidences of postmortems and police reports, pointing out glaring irregularities. We are going to talk today about some of the shocking aspects of this incident and the larger context of the pattern that permits such incidents. I'm joined today by General Sudhir Vombatkere. He's been a Major General in the Army, and he retired as the Additional Director General of Discipline and Vigilance. Thank you for joining us, General Vombatkere.
Thank you.
I'm going to read some extracts from this article, which are horrifying, and you may have already read. They quote eyewitnesses and family members of the victims. Some of the victims had multiple injury marks. They had been electrocuted. They had been dunked in water. And one of the eyewitnesses says, they returned his body mutilated with multiple fractures and a broken neck. One of those picked up was about 80 years old, Lal Hussain. And he's quoted as saying, I pleaded with them in the name of Allah, but the man hitting me only smiled, taking out a knife and saying, this is to gouge your eyes out with. When the men were being beaten up, about 10 to 12 women who were there began wailing and pleading with the army to release the men. The major ordered the soldiers to drag us in through the barbed wire and strip us naked. We fell on their feet and begged them, asking them that they need to have some water, which is the people who had been tortured, before they die, as is our custom. And one soldier replied, they deserve to die thirsty, before kicking us aside and dragging them with more force. Hearing about all these or reading about these, as an army veteran, how do you feel about such descriptions?
I think it's really horrifying, as you pointed out. We must remember that the victims are they are very badly affected, both mentally and, of course, physically. If there's torture, stories of torture are always horrifying. And if it has been done as described, then it is definitely not just horrifying, it's seriously illegal. And those who are responsible for it need to be pulled up, need to be punished with due process.
We'll come to the due process later, but can army pick up people on suspicion? And if yes, what are the protocols? What are the standard operating procedures that need to be followed? And surely they don't seem to have been followed in this case, if they are.
You see, when the army is out, mind you, I'm not justifying any violence by the army. There is just no justification for illegal violence. But one must remember that the army is out there doing a job which it is not really designed to do. It's not the primary duty of the army. It is the duty of the government using their police forces. So when the army is out there, picking up a person on suspicion is perfectly okay if it is done under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act powers at that time. But picking up a person on suspicion is different from torturing that person. That's a different issue altogether. Picking up a person on suspicion is perfectly permitted according to Section 4 of the Armed Forces Special Powers Act.
And what about, some of the accounts that we come across through the article? There is mention that some men were picked up from their homes, while others were just picked up on the way. So there are these random, the account shows that there's a way in which random men have been picked up. There were also men who worked for the intelligence agencies or the army who were picked up, and, at least two of them have been killed. So what does this say about, even A, picking up random men, and B, about targeting their own men or people who have been working for the government, who should be seen as probably assets within the security apparatus?
You see, what we may observe as random may not be random. There may be some system behind it, because whom they pick up is also based on intelligence available. And a person who is working with the government or with the army or with the security forces may have turned other ways. So it's not really random. But picking up people is different from, subjecting them to torture. Two completely different things. And we must distinguish between them.
Could this have been a case of revenge? There have been some speculations that this happened right after there was an encounter in which five army personnel were killed. Could this have been a revenge?
It can't be ruled out. But after all, soldiers are humans. We must remember that. And though I doubt it, the way the army works, the system under which the army works is not based on revenge. It is not based on hate. It is based on simply doing a job as we are trained to do, and to do it as well as possible.
Now, there are also indications, the earlier reports had pretty much focused only on one village. And it seemed that these men had been picked up from one village and that they had been taken to one security camp where they were tortured. This report in the Caravan points out that 25 men in all had been picked up from different areas. And they were not taken to one, but three different army posts. Is this an indication of a coordinated and a premeditated crackdown?
I'm unable to say whether it's premeditated and a crackdown, but let us go to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, the introduction to the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. The very first sentence in that, 1958, mind you, not yesterday, the very first sentence reads thus: violence became the way of life in northeastern states of India. So when violence is a way of life, then and the state administration is incapable to maintain order, it calls the army in. So the army being called in for maintaining law and order or internal security is evidence of total governance failure by the
The
state,
government.
by the government, by the state, capital S state. The army coming in, then of course the human element is there always. There is no question about that. As I said earlier, the soldier is also human. And if his body gets killed, then he is naturally upset. And they may well take revenge, or to hit back, to say, look, don't do this to us, don't play games with us. It is perfectly possible. But that's not the way in which we are trained to work.
And could this have happened if, the way has been reported, could this have happened without the knowledge of somebody high up in the command chain? There are references of the soldiers constantly talking to somebody on the phone, calling him commander. And one brigadier has been transferred in response to the outrage that followed this incident. could the responsibility lie even further up? Now you're talking about the government itself is responsible because it has failed to perform or to govern, and so it has called in the army. So does the responsibility lie further up in the command within the army and higher up in the political dispensation?
You see, in the army and the hierarchy, it usually doesn't go beyond the unit commander, that is the commanding officer. Usually it does not, and it should not. But you never know. There may be somebody at a higher level um, directing things. Very, very unlikely, but it's possible. Nothing is impossible in this game. But the point here is that it is not this government. It is
Yes, sir.
successive governments which have failed, and
Absolutely.
and it has come to this terrible condition because of successive governments building on the misgovernance of the earlier government.
And then they've also been pursuing a policy of rewarding and promoting officers, based on the number of kills, number of people that the armed personnel are able to kill. Does
I don't
that
think
add
that's
to?
quite correct. Promotions are
Really?
not based on the number of weapons captured or the number of persons killed, not at all.
But that's the normal perception. It has
Yeah,
been
that's
documented
correct.
in some of the human rights reports.
No, it may have been documented. It doesn't mean it's correct.
All right. Okay, I'll take it. But it's also reported that before this incident, the Army's Northern Command sent out directions to all ranks below him that the Army should identify black, gray, and white villages and population and treat them accordingly. And this direction contains instructions from the Union Home Minister. Its emphasis is to adopt an aggressive outlook. What do you make of such a policy that encourages forces to indulge in sheer lawlessness and see locals as suspects, and even advocates a kind of collective punishment on them?
It's it's not a good way of doing things, to put it mildly. But let us remember that when it's a matter of the army being deployed, I don't see why the defense minister has not done it and why it has to be the home ministry which is doing this. So uh, there you have a problem, all right. And to categorize villages as, black and gray and white is it's a very broad categorization, but it may indicate where there are more people who are against the dispensation, less people, or people who are not so against the dispensation. Intelligence will always indicate who is who is inclined in which direction. So it would be based on intelligence.
It can't be collective punishment, as in
No,
terms of
collective
villages being
punishment.
identifying. If the order is villages being, and then there seems to be, of course, you're right that it's the orders are coming from not the defense minister but the home minister, but there is a political dispensation involved, and the orders are coming right from the top, with the army officers kind of obligated to further endorse that and put it out.
I don't know about that. I would rather not comment on that. But you see, intelligence which is collected by military intelligence, by the police intelligence, by the intelligence bureau, all these are put together. They are collated, and there is some kind of picture which is prepared. That picture changes from week to week, a month to month. And we have to take the army works on the basis of actionable intelligence, not long-term intelligence. So actionable intelligence may say that you have to give more attention or keep a sharp eye on this and not on that so much. So there is always a pointedness to intelligence.
You've talked about that army, if they are indulging in such incidents, it needs to be investigated and they need to be punished. So what are the measures of accountability that can be taken up? I mean, let's just look at this particular incident and say, there is torture, then there is the army after the outrage. Army offers blood money, then there's a political outreach. The defense minister visits the place. There were SOPs announced for the victims, for the area, some welfare measures. And is this a way of, that's not accountability. Is this a way of systematically covering up for what has happened and what the only
Once,
punishments?
once again, I would like to say that the responsibility lies ultimately with the state, capital S state, with the government. And the government should be actually trying to find ways of solving a political problem by political means, not by using force, whether it is police force or army force. There has to be political problems can be only solved in the long term by political means, by the politics of discussion, by the politics of debate, of compromise. These things have to be done by political action. If you use the military or the security forces, it will yield results in the short term. It can yield results in the short term, but in the long term, it's actually counterproductive. And we are seeing the result of, 60 or plus years, not in Kashmir, in the Northeast, and in Kashmir, about 40 plus years of continuously trying to solve political problems by force.
I recall, on this point, in an article for the Frontline, you write, and this was written in October 2021, the military as an institution cannot misuse the AFSPA, the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. But misuse of the act by governments is institutional and risk-free. And you also write that the continuation of Armed Forces Special Powers Act reflects on the failures of the government. Could you elaborate on this? And, you just talked about there has to be a political outreach. Does it mean that the governments should be focusing more on conflict resolution through political means rather than just focusing on military methods for prolonged periods, as you say, 60, 70 years in the Northeast and 40 years, almost 40 years in Kashmir?
Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. We must remember that the army as an institution does not require the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. It is the individual soldier who is operating, who needs the act. And it is a package deal. You can't have one without the other. If you don't want the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, then you can't have the soldier. If you don't want the soldier, then you have to hand over the job to the police and let them do it. It's their job, their primary job. The administration has failed. The state police has failed. The central police forces have failed. So you call in the army, and you call in the army continuously for decades. It only stifles the political freedom of the people, whether it is Kashmir or Northeast or anywhere at all.
And why is it important, even for the army, not to be used to tackle internal situations for a prolonged period?
Because it detracts from training, for one thing, and also it detracts from preparedness for the primary role, because nearly 1/3 of the army would be deployed on internal security duties. And if tomorrow there is a serious threat from China or Pakistan or anywhere, the army will have to redeploy these troops who are on internal security duties, train them for actual warfare, a different operation of war, equip them accordingly. That cannot be done in 1 week. It takes time. Can we really afford that time?
You've talked about training, and my mind immediately went to this recent policy of Agniveers and the kind of trainings that very rigorous trainings that soldiers used to have earlier to prepare them to deal with situations on the frontiers. And of course, army was never trained to deal with civilians. But what happens when poorly trained personnel would become part of the army, would and be not just sent to the front lines, but also be sent into civilian areas to tackle the internal conflicts, to tackle political situations? Would there be, more incidents like the ones we've seen in Poonch, or so many we've seen in Northeast and Kashmir?
We can't say that. Firstly, I'd like to, if I may correct you, the training standards of the army have not changed because Agniveers have come. Training standards are the same. But it is whether the Agniveers will be able to match up to those training standards and be an effective member of the team. That is the difference. And the motivation for Agniveers, that is the difference. Otherwise, the army's training methods and standards remain the same.
Yeah, but the training periods that they will undergo is much shorter than what uh, normally the soldiers do.
Yeah, that's for their tour of duty of 4 years. And after that, 25%, I think that's the figure now, will be absorbed. A maximum of 25% will be absorbed, and 75% will leave. They will return to civilian life.
So
So
how do
those
you see
20,
this?
you see, even those 25%, they will start almost ab initio when they join as a regular recruit. And they cannot be an effective member of the team for some time. So there is a gap between their being taken on as regular recruits, regular soldiers, and they're becoming effective as a member of the team. That gap has got to be filled. How that gap will be filled over time, only time will tell. But apart from that, the problem with Agniveer is that it's had serious repercussions with, for example, Nepal. They are very unhappy with the Agniveer scheme.
Mm-hmm.
And the China is making use of it. I am told that the People's Liberation Army of China is planning to recruit Gurkha soldiers.
Now, coming back to accountability within the army, and particularly when there are acts of omission, like we've seen so many times in Northeast, in Kashmir, right now in Poonch, the incident we talked about. And there's been this debate going on for a long time, whether the army personnel or paramilitaries should be tried in the civil courts or the military courts, whether they should be, whether Armed Forces Special Powers Act be used as a shield to prevent their prosecution in civil courts. This case again is going into the military court. We've seen a history of cases where the military trials have ended in nothing. There have been rare convictions like we had in Matsil and Amshipura. And later, these men who were held guilty by the military court, they were let off by the army tribunals. So do you think it is fair to insist that the personnel charged of heinous crimes should be tried in military courts? Is it time to stop using the AFSPA as a shield?
The AFSPA is not a shield, it is an empowering act. The shield is it is required because the soldier cannot open fire, cannot do his job without the physical presence of a magistrate. And when a magistrate is not available because a large area is designated as a disturbed area by the government, then the Armed Forces Special Powers Act comes into play. If it's just a column, they can have a magistrate accompanying the column, but you can't have enough of magistrates. And in fact, that is precisely what Sardar Patel said when he was discussing the supporting the Armed Forces Special Powers Act 1958.
That they would need this act. But
Yes.
is it important to use that act again and again to prevent prosecution of armed personnel in the civil courts? Should they just be
No, it is the Army Act which says that when a soldier is on active duty, he has to be and being operating under the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is counted as active duty. When a soldier is on active duty in the border or under the AFSPA, then he is to be tried by the Army Act. If it is a civil crime, then it is by the civil court, like a robbery or
but
rape.
these are not civil crimes.
No, they are civil crimes. So the government has got to put pressure on the army to get them to agree to allow this person to be tried under criminal law.
It's the defense ministry that doesn't give the nod.
Yeah, so that's the government.
So it's not the army, you would say.
No, it's not the army.
And do you think,
Precisely.
do you think Armed Forces Special Powers Act can be repealed? I remember reading your article and you mentioned that it's now, it's been there and no government would kind of, have the courage to repeal it. And then you recommend that it needs to be amended. And you talk about Amendment 3. Could you elaborate on that, what this would really mean?
You see, the army is the instrument of last resort for any government of any country. It's the instrument of last resort. If one can't do it by political means, then you use the police. If the police fails, you call the state police. If the state police fails, you call the army. If the army fails, what happens? So
Yes.
it is something which it is a trump card. A trump card should not be played unless you really need to make the trick. But here, what we are doing is that we are using the trump card continuously for so many years, and that is definitely proving politically destructive, and it's actually dividing the people. Now, no government is going to repeal the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. No government, regardless of their political ideology or whether they are left or right or center, because governance is not an easy job. Governance is very, very difficult. And it is not always possible to get people to agree. There will always be a violent section of society. You have to control them, and there's no option but to use violence, but to the minimum possible. That is where the judgment comes in. And the successive governments have been very poor in their judgment of how to use force and for how long and what level of force. So Armed Forces Special Powers Act will never, never, never be repealed. The only thing is to amend the Armed Forces Special Powers Act so that it is not used continuously by every 6 months giving an order, a government notification saying that it is extended for another 6 months. This has been happening,
Right.
and even ex post facto it has happened. Now, this is about the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, but you may be interested to know that there is now the new Bharatiya, what do they call, the Bharatiya Sanhitas, and the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita. In section 150, it says the title of section 150 is Power of Certain Armed Forces Officers to Disperse Assembly. And it reads thus, I am reading it out, quote, when the public security is manifestly endangered by any such assembly and no executive magistrate can be communicated with, any commissioned or gazetted officer of the armed forces may disperse such assembly with the help of the armed forces under his command, and may arrest and confine any persons forming part of it, etc., etc. The difference between this section 150 uh, of the
Armed Forces Special.
Sanhita. No, this is the Bharatiya Nyaya. 1 minute. Bharatiya.
Yeah, even I can't get the name, but yes, the
Yeah,
new criminal
it is,
procedure code, right?
Yeah, it is the Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita. So section 150 says something else. But the difference between this and the Armed Forces Special Powers Act is, in the AFSPA, a non-commissioned officer can take a decision. In this one, only a commissioned officer can. But essentially, it is raising the level of responsibility, which is a good thing. But maybe it would encourage dispensing with the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. I don't know. But here you've got an overriding section of the Nagarika Sanhita,
Which would
which,
be applicable to any part of the country.
yes. So and it will come under the police.
So what you're virtually doing is to convert the entire country, to bring the entire country under a kind of, similar law. Is that it?
Yes.
And, to sum up, from what I understood, you feel that there needs to be accountability within the armed forces, but the larger remedy you think is in using army as the last resort and not using army or misusing army in conflict regions for a prolonged period. Have I got you right?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you so much, General Vombatkere. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Anuradha.